Kinnock.
Thank you very much. I just had a question to follow up really on what Pat McFadden was asking earlier about the free movement of lorries. So this issue around trucks, and particularly at the Turkey-Bulgaria border. I mean, it seems that the case is that, you know, a customs union or a form of customs union delivers free movement of goods to a large extent, but it doesn't deliver the free movement of trucks. It seems that the main issue there is around free movement of people and free movement of labour. So you can't have the free movement of trucks if you don't have the free movement of people. By definition, they're driven by people. My understanding is that you have a certain number of transport permits there, and that the only countries that the EU has open access road transport deals with are the European Economic Area countries. So can you say a bit more about how this issue of road transport would work if the UK were to leave the European Economic Area?
Turkey, you need to negotiate with, independently with the members of the European Union. For instance, in the case of Bulgaria or Romania, because Turkish trucks also had problems with Romania. So these quotas or permits that you mentioned are the living examples of the problem. So basically, a Turkish lorry which starts from Istanbul to its trip, which goes through Bulgaria, Austria, because Austria had the same issue. So basically, you need to negotiate with the country how much quota or how much, licenses or permits a day they will provide to you. For the other countries, for the EA, yes, there's another, potential, but you're not going directly to the EA countries. You have to pass through the border. Therefore, as it stands, that's a bleeding problem. And after the decision of the European Court of Justice, we're hoping that things may improve, because this way you can have some saying with the independent member state, individual member states, that there's a court judgment. But, as it stands, I cannot offer you a perfect solution, to the extent this authority, this policy will be within the hands of the independent member states.
So if the UK were to leave the European Union and just have a standalone customs union, and not an EEA-style relationship, we would then have to negotiate quotas with each one of the member states for whether or not our trucks can go through those countries?
Well, perhaps we shouldn't generalize that much, because after all, you're dealing with 27 countries, and in Turkey's experience, we have problems only with 2 or 3 countries. So it doesn't say every country will create the same problem. So depending on with whom you're shipping your products much, it will depend on what kind of arrangement you have. So I cannot say for France, I cannot say for Belgium. It truly depends on their policy regarding the road transportation.
Thank you very much. And just one final question on this issue of the difference between goods and services eliding. Back in September, Michel Barnier described the single market for goods and services as an ecosystem that has grown over decades. You cannot play with it by picking pieces. This is another reason why I strongly oppose the Chequers proposal. There are services in every product. In your mobile phone, for example, it is 20 to 40% services. So a question to anyone on the panel that would like to address that. Would you agree with Monsieur Barnier's comments there that customs union without single market is not really worth the paper it's written on?
No, I don't entirely agree, because it still obviously has benefits, and all free trade agreements in essence split services and goods insofar as they don't do very much on services and they do quite a lot on goods. Switzerland is in the single market for goods, effectively, not single market for services. Is the general point about our services and goods intertwining is absolutely right. If you think about UK exports, goods exports, it's been estimated about 50 billion of the value of our goods exports is actually made up of services inputs around them, and that's quite significant. It's around the same as financial services exports. So it matters. But in terms of the consequences for the EU of, say, a customs union when it comes to the services value added in goods, so say, for example, a Rolls-Royce contract whereby they lease the engine, but and it comes with a contract to maintain it, to monitor it and maintain it. On the services issue, we could still provide the engine from the UK, but the legal contract would probably have to be signed in the EU, and the person who actually maintains it and monitors it established in the EU. So in a sense, it would actually, on the services side at least, benefit the EU insofar as that economic activity would have to be located there. Does it make it less beneficial for the UK to have a customs union without everything else? Of course, we're talking about degrees of disalignment in terms of how do you ensure that there's no or very little negative economic impact. You stay as close to what we have now as possible. The further you go away from that, and customs union is on the FTA end of the spectrum, it's not on the single market end of the spectrum, the more damage you have.
But, I mean, this is there's a general problem with trade agreements at the moment anyway, is that they are falling a little bit behind the nature of the modern economy, the intertwining of services and goods. What do you do with data? And if you talk to, for example, the car industry at the moment, trade, yes, they're worried about trade, but they're also worried about who owns all the data in the car. And there are so many questions that really we're all still trying to get to grips with. So it's not just... there are other conversations other than Brexit going on in some industries. They're just about managing.
Okay, thank you.
Stuff full of services, it will be defined as a good, and if you look in the standard industrial trade classification, it will be defined as a good.